You awaken in the dead of night, your eyes frantically adjusting to the suffocating darkness of your own bedroom. The air feels unnaturally heavy, pressing down on your chest with the crushing weight of wet earth. You try to turn your head, to reach out for the familiar comfort of the bedside lamp, but your muscles completely refuse to obey. It is in this terrifying state of utter vulnerability that you notice the far corner of the room. The darkness there is perceptibly thicker, pooling into an impossibly dense silhouette that seems to actively absorb the faint moonlight bleeding through the blinds. A deeply primal instinct screams from the oldest, most reptilian recesses of your brain, warning you that you are no longer alone in the dark. This is not a trick of the exhausted eye, nor a simple misinterpretation of a heavy coat draped carelessly over a chair. The intense dread washing over your paralyzed body confirms the undeniable presence of an unseen predator. You are experiencing what countless others have endured in the agonizingly silent hours before dawn breaks. The towering entity standing perfectly still at the foot of your bed is watching you with an unfathomable purpose. These terrifying manifestations are universally known to researchers and victims alike as shadow people. Reports of these humanoid shadows span across vast continents, diverse cultures, and centuries of recorded history, weaving a dark, unsettling thread through the tapestry of human experience. Witnesses consistently describe them as three-dimensional voids, somehow darker than the night itself, completely lacking any discernible facial features, eyes, or clothing. They exist quietly on the very periphery of our vision, slipping through the fragile cracks of our reality when our psychological and physical defenses are utterly stripped away by exhaustion. One particularly chilling account from a quiet suburban home in the late 1990s details a phenomenon that has become disturbingly common among those who suffer in the dark. A young man trapped in the rigid, inescapable grip of sleep paralysis watched in horror as a towering figure manifested directly beside his closet door. As the witness recounted, the entity wore a distinct, wide-brimmed hat and a long, flowing trench coat, yet it possessed absolutely no physical substance. The Hat Man, as this specific shadow entity is often called by terrified survivors, slowly glided across the bedroom floor without making a single sound. The sheer terror of that specific encounter did not stem from any sudden violent action, but from the unbearable, suffocating anticipation of what the figure might do next. The towering silhouette leaned over the paralyzed man, its featureless face hovering mere inches away from his own. A cold, static energy crackled in the stagnant room air, accompanied by a low, rhythmic buzzing that seemed to vibrate deep within the victim's skull. It was a deeply personal invasion of the bedroom, the one sacred place where we are supposed to feel entirely safe from the outside world. Long before modern internet forums and late-night radio shows categorized these widespread encounters, ancient cultures documented the exact same nocturnal horrors in their sacred texts. Local folklore claims that invisible spirits roam the night, deliberately seeking out the vulnerable, the sick, and the deeply sleeping. From the suffocating night hags of medieval European legend to the shadowy jinn of ancient Middle Eastern texts, human history is replete with dire warnings about entities that feast upon our nocturnal terror. The ancient world clearly understood a truth we have forgotten, which is that the darkness was rarely ever empty. Some modern paranormal researchers propose that these beings are actually interdimensional travelers, existing on a vibrational frequency just slightly out of phase with our own physical universe. When the invisible veil between worlds temporarily thins, perhaps during the twilight state between wakefulness and deep sleep, their dark reality bleeds seamlessly into ours. Others suggest they are a form of ectoplasmic manifestation, born entirely from the accumulated negative energy and trauma of a specific location. Whatever their true, unknowable nature might be, the profound unease they generate cannot be easily dismissed as a mere trick of the mind. Consider the harrowing testimony of a night shift nurse working alone in a nearly abandoned, decaying wing of a historic metropolitan hospital. Walking slowly down a dimly lit, echoing corridor, she observed a cluster of shadowy figures darting rapidly between the closed doors of empty patient rooms. Investigators later confirmed that the specific wing had a long, documented history of unexplained phenomena, mysterious equipment failures, and sudden drops in ambient temperature. These were not the sleep-induced visions of a paralyzed mind, but waking encounters observed by a fully alert, highly trained medical professional. The terrifying implications of such waking sightings completely shatter the fragile, comforting illusion of scientific rationalization. If these impossible beings can manifest in the stark, fluorescent light of a hospital corridor, then no closed door, locked window, or security system can truly keep them at bay. The realization that we might be unwittingly sharing our physical space with intangible, silent observers breeds a very specific, corrosive type of paranoia. Every harmless flicker in the peripheral vision suddenly becomes a potential threat, and every darkened hallway transforms into a psychological gauntlet that must be run. During the height of the Victorian spiritualism movement, seance attendees frequently reported witnessing similar dark masses forming in the shadowed corners of the parlor. Mediums of the era referred to these shapes as the unquiet dead, lingering souls stripped of their humanity and reduced to a pure, shadowy essence. Journal entries from the period detailed how these dark masses would occasionally detach from the heavy velvet drapes, moving entirely independently of the flickering candlelight. The ornate parlor, much like the modern bedroom, became a theater for the unknown, where the living were forced to confront the unseen. The transition from a static, observing presence to an active, moving entity marks a terrifying escalation in the nature of these hauntings. Imagine sitting alone in your living room, the television providing the only illumination, when a shadow deliberately detaches itself from the bookshelf. It does not stretch or distort like a natural cast shadow. It moves with a deliberate bipedal purpose that defies all logic. It slips behind the sofa, entirely independent of the light source in the room, leaving behind a lingering trail of freezing, stagnant air. The atmosphere in the room immediately thickens, taking on a bitter, metallic taste that coats the back of your throat. The silence becomes oppressive, ringing sharply in your ears as the unseen entity navigates the physical space around you. You know it is crouching just out of sight, waiting patiently for the precise moment to reveal itself again. The creeping dread paralyzes your mind just as effectively as any physical restraint could, locking you in a silent, desperate battle of wills with an invisible predator. When paranormal researchers investigate homes plagued by these specific sightings, their sensitive equipment often registers bizarre, inexplicable anomalies. Electromagnetic field meters spike violently in the exact corners where the dark figures were reported to stand, long after the entity has vanished. Digital thermometers record isolated pockets of freezing air, known as cold spots, that move erratically through the rooms, as if guided by an unseen intelligence. These measurable physical changes in the environment strongly suggest that the shadow entities possess a tangible, if poorly understood, energetic signature. The aftermath of living in such a haunted environment leaves deep, lasting psychological scars on the unfortunate inhabitants. Sleep deprivation becomes a chronic, agonizing torture, as the simple act of closing one's eyes requires a monumental leap of faith. The victims often develop a hyper-awareness of their surroundings, constantly scanning the edges of their vision for any subtle sign of movement. The trauma of being hunted in one's own home fundamentally alters their perception of reality, permanently shattering their sense of safety and well-being. While most shadow figures are described as featureless voids, a particularly malevolent variant possesses a single, terrifying detail that sets it apart. Witnesses have repeatedly reported encountering shadows with piercing, glowing red eyes that burn with an intense, hateful intelligence in the dark. This specific manifestation is almost always accompanied by an overwhelming sense of malice, a distinct feeling that the entity does not merely want to observe, but to actively harm. The crimson gaze locks onto the victim, anchoring them in a state of absolute, inescapable terror. A family residing in an isolated rural farmhouse meticulously documented a series of shared encounters with one such red-eyed entity. The youngest daughter first complained of a dark man standing quietly by her window, a claim initially dismissed by her parents as a childish nightmare. However, weeks later, both parents awoke simultaneously in the dead of night to find the exact same towering shadow looming over their own bed. The journal entry detailed how the entity's glowing eyes seemed to emit a faint crimson light that illuminated absolutely nothing else in the pitch-black room. This terrifying consistency across different family members echoes the chilling warnings found in indigenous folklore regarding shape-shifting tricksters and spectral stalkers. Many tribal traditions speak of dark spirits that feed directly on the vital energy of the living, drawn like moths to homes where fear, grief, and discord reside. They are described as parasitic entities, latching onto a family and slowly, methodically draining their spiritual and physical reserves over time. The red eyes, in these ancient traditions, are a dire sign of a spirit that has consumed enough human terror to manifest its own sinister light. If we consider the deeply unsettling hypothesis that these entities are indeed energetic parasites, their behavior begins to follow a grim, predatory logic. The sudden paralysis, the suffocating pressure on the chest, the overwhelming dread, these are not merely accidental side effects of the encounter, but the very mechanism of their feeding. By inducing a state of absolute terror, they generate the dense, negative emotional energy required to sustain their unnatural manifestation in our physical world. The victim unknowingly becomes an unwilling host to an otherworldly parasite that thrives on their fear. The true, lingering horror lies in the terrible possibility that they are never truly gone, even when we can no longer see them. When the sun finally rises and the shadows retreat to the forgotten corners of the room, they merely blend into the mundane darkness of our daily lives. They hide in the narrow spaces between the furniture, in the dark recesses of the hallway closet, waiting patiently for the endless cycle of night to begin again. The realization that your sanctuary is permanently compromised is a heavy, suffocating burden to bear. The profound isolation of this experience is perhaps its most devastating and psychologically damaging component. When you are pinned helplessly to the mattress, staring up into the featureless void of a shadow entity, you are entirely cut off from the rest of humanity. You cannot scream for help, you cannot run for the door, and you cannot reason with the darkness that surrounds you. It is a profoundly solitary confrontation with the unknown, leaving you to desperately question your own sanity once the paralysis finally breaks and the entity vanishes into thin air. Sometimes, the vanishing is not immediate, nor is it a simple fading away into the background. Accounts suggest that as the victim slowly regains control of their trembling limbs, the shadow does not simply disappear, but actively and deliberately retreats. It might sink into the solid floorboards like a spilled, viscous liquid, or fold itself impossibly thin to slide seamlessly beneath the closed bedroom door. Watching a three-dimensional entity effortlessly break the fundamental laws of physics to escape sight only cements the terrifying, undeniable reality of the encounter. The dusty archives of abandoned asylums and antiquated psychiatric hospitals are filled with similar desperate accounts from forgotten patients. Before modern medicine attempted to categorize these experiences as mere hallucinations, inmates frequently begged the orderly staff to leave the heavy hallway lights burning through the night. They whispered frantic, terrified tales of the dark men who walked the wards at midnight, figures that slipped through the locked iron doors with terrifying ease. The institutional records, though steeped in the clinical language of madness, perfectly describe the modern shadow phenomenon in chilling detail. This historical continuity forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable question about the very nature of human perception and our understanding of reality. Are we all suffering from the exact same, highly specific neurological glitch, or are we collectively perceiving a hidden, darker layer of our environment? The constant, dizzying blurring of the line between a sleeping nightmare and a waking reality creates a profound psychological unease that cannot be easily shaken. It suggests that our five senses are entirely inadequate for detecting the true, unseen dangers that surround us every single day. The global synchronicity of these encounters remains the most compelling and disturbing piece of this paranormal puzzle. A business executive in Tokyo, a university student in London, and a lonely farmer in the American Midwest will all describe the exact same featureless silhouette, the same suffocating pressure, the same primal dread. They describe the same towering hat man, the same red-eyed watcher, the same darting figures in the periphery of their vision. Such widespread consistency completely defies the simple, comforting explanation of isolated, random hallucinations brought on by stress. As the night deepens and the ambient sounds of your house settle into a quiet, familiar rhythm, pay close attention to the darker corners of your room. When you finally turn off the lamp and the darkness rushes in to fill the empty space, watch the shadows cast by the pale moonlight. If one of those shadows seems just a little too dense or appears to shift when the air is perfectly still, do not dismiss it as a trick of the eye. The entities that dwell in the dark are always watching, silently waiting for the exact moment you finally realize they are there.